Imagine you're a child, but there's no school, no toys, no bedtime stories. Instead, your day begins with hauling water, learning to make fire, and possibly a straining to survive wild animal attacks. And here's the twist. In prehistoric times, your own parents might have pushed you into dangerous, even deadly situations, because your survival and the survival of the tribe depended on it. What if everything you thought you knew about parenting was turned upside down thousands of years before playgrounds and report cards even existed?
You must learn. Survival depends on this.
Picture this. The year is somewhere around 12,000 BCE. There's no hospital, no midwife with a warm smile, no sterile gloves. A mother gives birth in the flickering firelight of a cave or under the open sky, surrounded by a few trusted women from the tribe if she's lucky. Childbirth here isn't just painful, it's dangerous. For both mother and child, survival is not guaranteed. In prehistoric times, infant mortality rates were staggering. Archaeological studies suggest that nearly half of all children never lived past the age of 5. This meant that from the moment a child drew its first breath, the clock started ticking, and every decision the parents made was about beating those odds. From day one, a newborn wasn't seen as fragile in the modern sense. It was seen as a potential future hunter, gatherer, or caretaker for the tribe. The swaddling blanket, often nothing more than animal skins. The crib, a dugout section of earth lined with straw or fur. And forget about lullaby soothing sounds, were more likely the distant howl of wolves, reminding everyone why vigilance was a constant necessity. Mothers were the primary caregivers, but parenting was communal. In small hunter-gatherer bands, an infant might pass through several sets of arms in a single day. Older siblings, sometimes only 5 or 6 themselves, were already tasked with carrying the baby while adults worked. This all-hands-on-deck approach wasn't just about love. It was strategy. The more people responsible for a child, the higher its odds of survival. But survival came with expectations. Even as a baby, you were brought along on hunts, migrations, and foraging trips. Your tiny body was strapped to your mother's back as she crossed rivers or hiked miles for food. This wasn't coddling, it was early exposure to the world you'd need to master. In the Stone Age, life didn't wait for you to grow up. It started molding you the moment you opened your eyes. The first few weeks of life were a constant test. There was no concept of baby food or formula. Nourishment came directly from the mother, or, if she couldn't produce milk, from another lactating woman in the tribe. This was not just generosity. It was a survival protocol. Anthropologists call this allomothering, the shared caregiving system that ensured no infant went hungry if one mother fell ill or died. Temperature control was another battle. Without insulated homes or thermostats, parents had to use ingenuity to keep infants alive in extreme weather. In colder climates, babies often slept pressed against a parent's bare skin beneath layers of furs, benefiting from shared body heat. In hotter regions, they were shaded with woven grasses or positioned near streams to keep cool. The wrong choice here wasn't a matter of discomfort, it could mean death within hours. And while we picture prehistoric life as brutally simple, parents were remarkably observant of early child development. They noticed how quickly a baby grasped objects, tracked movement, or responded to sounds. These weren't just cute milestones. They were indicators of whether the child was strong enough to survive. Weakness was met with extra care, but also with the harsh reality that resources couldn't always support the frailest members. Then there were the dangers no parent could fully control: disease, predators, and accidents. A baby's cry could draw unwanted attention from a prowling cat or alert rival tribes to their location. For this reason, mothers learned to soothe and silence their children quickly, sometimes carrying them in slings that kept them pressed tightly to the body, muffling their sounds. Even in these earliest days, prehistoric parents were making hard, calculated choices. Every moment was a balance between protecting the child and preparing it for the relentless challenges of the world outside the campfire-esque glow. By the time a prehistoric child reached a few months old, they were no longer just a passive bundle in someone's arms. They were already part of the tribe's rhythm. Parents didn't separate adult life from child life. Instead, children were immersed in daily routines from the start. Morning might begin with the mother gathering edible plants, the infant tied securely in a sling against her chest, absorbing the scent of herbs and hearing the rhythmic sound of leaves being stripped. These sensory experiences were an early education, even before the child could understand what they meant. The crackle of fire, the sharp stench of smoke, the rustle of approaching footsteps, each sound, smell, and movement was a lesson in awareness. Physical contact was constant. Babies weren't placed in a separate bed or playpen. They were carried, held, or kept within arm's reach at all times. This closeness not only kept them safe, but also allowed parents to read subtle changes: breathing patterns, muscle tension, the tone of a cry that might signal illness or distress. In a world without medicine, early detection of a problem could be the difference between life and death. Yet danger was always just beyond the circle of firelight. Parents had to make quick decisions. Do we risk moving the camp today with the baby still feverish? Do we stop for the night in an open plain where predators roam, or push on toward rocky ground for better shelter? These weren't abstract hypotheticals, they were choices made almost daily. And hovering over all of this was an unspoken truth. In prehistoric life, nature did not forgive mistakes. Parents loved their children fiercely, but love alone could not keep them alive. It had to be paired with vigilance, skill, and the constant readiness to adapt. By the time a child could crawl, they were already a survivor in training, because, in the Stone Age, the real education began almost immediately. In our world, a child's first lessons might be learning the alphabet, stacking colorful blocks, or singing nursery rhymes. In the prehistoric world, education meant something entirely different, less about letters and numbers, more about not dying before sunset. By the time a child could walk, sometimes as early as 12 to 14 months, they were already shadowing their parents or older siblings in real work. This wasn't pretend play. It was the first step in mastering skills they would need to survive. A toddler might be handed a stick to dig for roots, a small net to catch insects, or a sharpened flint to help scrape hides. There was no safety padding, no dull edges. If you cut yourself, you learned to be more careful next time. Children observed everything: how to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, how to spot the subtle shift in bird calls that signaled a predator nearby. These lessons weren't delivered in a classroom, but in the middle of everyday life, surrounded by the raw, unpredictable elements of nature. Mistakes weren't just corrected, they were remembered. A child who wandered too far from the group once wouldn't be scolded with words alone. They might be kept tied to a parent's waist for days as a constant reminder. Not as cruelty, but as insurance. And here's the shocking part. By age 4 or 5, Many prehistoric children were already contributing to the tribe's survival in small but essential ways, gathering kindling, carrying water, guarding younger siblings from stray dogs or scavengers. Childhood, as we think of it today, barely existed. The underlying philosophy was simple. Every skill you learned early increased your chance of living long enough to pass it on to someone else. The harshness wasn't a lack of love, was a form of love shaped entirely by necessity. By the time a child reached 6 or 7, the expectations grew heavier, and so did the tools in their hands. For boys in many prehistoric groups, this meant learning to handle miniature versions of adult weapons. A small spear, light enough for their strength, might be given during a group hunt. Not so they could kill large prey yet, but so they could learn the rhythm of movement, the timing of a throw, and the importance of precision. Girls, depending on the culture and environment, were equally vital to survival. They were taught to weave baskets for carrying food, to prepare hides for clothing, and to store water in animal bladders. These tasks were not less dangerous than hunting. A poorly prepared hide could leave the whole group vulnerable to cold. An unclean water container could sicken the tribe. Every skill carried high stakes. Training wasn't scheduled, it was constant. If a herd of deer appeared, a child might be called away from play to help with the hunt. If a sudden rainstorm threatened, they learned to help secure shelters. Parents rarely explained the why in detail. The how was the lesson. And here's the crucial part: failure was tolerated, but repeated mistakes weren't. A child who kept forgetting to tie food high in a tree, away from predators, could put the entire group in danger. Discipline here wasn't about bruised egos, it was about survival math. One person's error could mean 10 people's suffering. Even playtime, when it existed, was training in disguise. Wrestling with siblings built strength for grappling animals. Throwing stones at targets sharpened hunting accuracy. Running races improved endurance for long treks. The line between fun and training was blurry, if it existed at all. By the time a child reached the edge of adolescence, they weren't just learning survival, they were living it every day. Adolescence in prehistoric life didn't arrive with birthday cakes or parties. It arrived with responsibilities that could determine whether you lived to see adulthood at all. By the ages of 9 or 10, many children were already taking part in real hunts, not just as observers, but as active participants. Boys might join in smaller game hunts, hares, birds, or fish where a wrong move wouldn't cost the entire group a feast, but would still teach stealth and precision. Girls, in many societies, took on major roles in food preparation, resource storage, and even medicinal work, collecting herbs, preparing salves, and learning which plants could heal wounds or stop bleeding. This knowledge was vital, especially in communities without any formal healers. Learning was almost always hunting. If you were taught to fish, you didn't stand beside someone watching for hours. You were handed a spear, told where to stand in the water, and learned through the splash of a mist strike. If you were taught to weave, you were expected to produce something usable, not a tangle of fibers. Mistakes were corrected in real time, often with sharp, direct feedback. There was simply no room for sugarcoating. But there was also pride in this process. When a child brought back their first successful catch or crafted their first serviceable tool, the accomplishment wasn't just theirs, it was celebrated by the tribe. Each new skill meant one more set of capable hands contributing to the group's survival. This intense early training was not about robbing children of their youth. It was about giving them the best possible chance to survive a world that could be merciless. The sooner they could hold their own, the sooner they could stand as protectors of both themselves and their community. In the prehistoric world, your education ended not when you stopped learning, but when the skills you'd been taught were the very ones keeping you alive. In the modern world, discipline might mean grounding a child, taking away their phone, or giving them a stern lecture. In the Stone Age, discipline was far more direct and far more unforgiving, because the stakes weren't about grades or manners. They were about life and death. A prehistoric parent couldn't afford to let disobedience slide. If a child failed to listen during a hunt, they could startle the prey or attract predators. If they ignored warnings about poisonous plants, they could endanger themselves and anyone who shared a meal with them. Rules weren't suggestions, they were survival codes. Punishments varied from tribe to tribe, but physical correction was common and immediate. A sharp smack to the hand for touching dangerous tools. A cuff on the ear for wandering away from camp. These weren't acts of cruelty in their context, they were quick, visceral reminders to anchor lessons in a child's mind. But discipline wasn't always physical. Social correction was just as powerful. A child who repeatedly ignored instructions might be excluded from certain activities for days or even weeks. An isolation that was emotionally painful in tightly knit groups. In some cases, older children were made responsible for the mistakes of younger ones, creating a system of peer accountability. Fear was also a teaching tool. Stories of monsters lurking in the dark or spirits punishing disobedient children were common. While these tales often carried spiritual meaning, they doubled as cautionary warnings to keep children close and compliant. And yet, discipline was almost always paired with guidance. A parent didn't simply punish, they showed the correct way immediately after. The point wasn't to break the child's spirit. It was to hardwire habits that could save their life later. In the Stone Age, discipline wasn't about being strict for its own sake. It was about ensuring that every member of the tribe, no matter how small, could be trusted to act in ways that protected the whole. Discipline in prehistoric societies often came disguised as work. If you made a mistake, you might be assigned an unpleasant or exhausting task as a form of correction. Spill water from the carrying skin, you'd be sent back to the stream to refill it alone, and perhaps over rugged terrain, fail to keep the fire alive at night. You'd gather firewood from the outskirts, knowing predators might be nearby. These punishments doubled as lessons. Your actions have consequences, and fixing them is your responsibility. Another powerful method was public correction. In a small tribe, everyone knew everyone's business. If a child disobeyed an important instruction, the reprimand often happened in front of others. This wasn't meant purely to embarrass it, reinforced to the whole group what behavior was unacceptable. It also made sure the lesson stuck, not just with the offender, but with every child who heard it. But perhaps the most surprising form of discipline came in the shape of deliberate hardship. Sometimes parents or elders would set controlled challenges, sending children out to fetch something heavy, making them cross a small stream alone, or forcing them to sleep in a slightly colder area of the shelter. These weren't acts of cruelty. They were stress tests, teaching resilience and adaptability. Storytelling, too, played a role in discipline. Myths and cautionary tales were crafted with moral lessons, often featuring children who disobeyed and suffered grim fates. In these stories, danger was personified in spirits, beasts, or natural forces. The message was clear: the world is unforgiving, and only those who follow the rules live to see another sunrise. While modern ears might hear these methods as severe, they were balanced by constant communal life. Even after being punished, a child would still be fed, protected, and included in daily tasks. The correction was sharp, but the bond remained unbroken. In the prehistoric mind, discipline was never separate from love. It was love sharpened into survival skills. By adolescence, discipline had shifted from quick corrections to long-term expectations. A child who had once been scolded for wandering too far was now trusted to scout ahead, but with that trust came the weight of responsibility. If they failed, the consequences could be devastating for the entire group. One of the most striking aspects of Stone Age discipline was how it blurred with mentorship. Elders didn't just correct mistakes, they embedded young people in the tribe's survival systems. If a teenager missed a spear throw during a hunt, an older hunter might spend hours retraining their stance, grip, and timing, repeating the drill until the motion was flawless. This wasn't optional, it was expected, and the social pressure to improve was immense. Accountability was collective, as well as personal. If a small hunting party failed because one member was careless, the entire group felt the sting of hunger. That peer-driven discipline often pushed young people harder than any parent could. Nobody wanted to be the weak link. Sometimes, lessons came in silence rather than punishment. A youth who ignored instructions might find themselves quietly excluded from critical missions until they proved reliability again. In a world where status was tied to usefulness, being sidelined was a deeply felt rebuke. And yet, these harsh measures produced something essential: competence. By the time a young person reached full adulthood, in their mid-teens, they were expected to operate independently, whether foraging alone, navigating dangerous terrain, or defending themselves against predators. Stone Age discipline wasn't about domination or control for its own sake. It was about forging individuals the tribe could depend on in moments of crisis. In a way, it was the highest form of respect. You were disciplined, not because you were weak, but because you were worth shaping into someone strong. In modern life, becoming an adult might mean turning 18, graduating, or getting your first job. In the Stone Age, adulthood wasn't marked by a birthday, it was earned through trial, pain, and proof that you could survive on your own. Rites of passage varied across prehistoric cultures, but the purpose was the same: to strip away the identity of child and replace it with that of a capable adult member of the tribe. These ceremonies weren't symbolic alone, they were physical and often dangerous. For boys in many hunter-gatherer societies, the trial might involve joining a real hunt for large game, sometimes without the safety of experienced adults close by. Success meant not just skill with a weapon, but the ability to track, plan, and remain calm under extreme pressure. Failure could mean injury or worse. Girls, too, underwent their own initiation rituals. In some regions, their trials were tied to gathering and resource management, being sent to collect food or medicinal plants from distant, risky locations, navigating alone, and returning safely. In others, the rite could involve enduring a period of isolation to prove self-sufficiency, sometimes lasting several days. These transitions weren't private affairs. The entire tribe often watched or participated, turning the ordeal into a public test of courage and ability. The pressure wasn't just about physical challenge, it was about proving mental resilience in front of the very people you would rely on for the rest of your life. Many of these rites also included symbolic markings, scars, tattoos, or tooth alterations that permanently displayed the person's new status. These weren't decorations. They were visible proof to everyone, including rival tribes, that this individual had earned their place as a capable adult. In the prehistoric world, no one was handed adulthood. It had to be taken, often in ways that pushed a young person to their very limits. For many prehistoric youths, The rite of passage was less a celebration and more a calculated stress test designed to reveal who could be relied upon in crisis. These trials often began with elders deliberately placing the initiate in an unfamiliar and dangerous situation. One common challenge was the solo survival trek, being sent into the wild with minimal supplies, sometimes nothing more than a simple weapon and basic knowledge. The initiate had to find food, water, and shelter while avoiding predators, harsh weather, and hostile terrain. Returning after several days proved not just endurance, but the ability to apply every lesson learned since childhood. Another form of initiation was pain endurance. Archaeological evidence and anthropological comparisons suggest that some groups used controlled physical ordeals, piercings, scarification, or exposure to extreme cold or heat, not as cruelty, but as a symbolic shedding of childhood comfort. The idea was simple. If you could endure pain willingly, you could endure the hardships of adult life. For young women, rites could also involve intense demonstrations of skill preparing clothing from raw hides, crafting tools, or storing food for the tribe under strict time limits. These tasks, while less physically dangerous than a hunt, were equally vital. Failure could mean the tribe lacked clothing in winter or food during scarcity. The mental challenge was often as grueling as the physical one. Some initiates were expected to fast for days, meditate alone in the wilderness, or confront fears in symbolic ways, such as sleeping unguarded in a cave known to be frequented by predators. Completion of the rite didn't just grant adult status. It redefined social identity. From that day forward, the initiate was no longer protected under the leniencies given to children. They were a full contributor to the tribe and fully accountable for its survival. In the Stone Age, these moments weren't just tradition. They were the final exam of a lifetime of preparation. When an initiate returned from their trial, whether it was a hunt, a solo journey, or a test of endurance, it wasn't the end of the rite. The homecoming itself was a carefully choreographed moment, steeped in symbolism. The tribe often greeted the returning youth not with cheers, but with silence. This was deliberate, forcing the initiate to stand before everyone and declare what they had achieved. Sometimes they recounted the dangers faced. Sometimes they simply presented proof. A kill from the hunt, food gathered, tools they had made. Only after this declaration would the group erupt into celebration. Ceremonies followed, each unique to the culture. Some tribes painted the initiate's body with ochre or charcoal patterns to signify their new role. Others gave them their first adult weapon, a spear, a bow, or a stone blade, blessing it in the firelight. For young women, the gift might be a tool of creation, a weaving kit, a basket, or a set of bone needles, symbolizing the power to provide for and sustain life. Markings made during this stage, scars, tattoos, or piercings, were not only personal mementos but public announcements. Anyone from another group could see, at a glance, that this was no longer a child. These marks also forged a deep bond between those who had undergone the same rite, creating an unspoken brotherhood or sisterhood among adults of the tribe. The celebration often included feasting, singing, and dancing. But beneath the joy was a sober understanding. The initiate's life had changed forever. From this point on, mistakes carried full consequences. There was no safety net, no second set of hands to pick up the slack. You were expected to stand on your own and protect others in return. In the prehistoric world, becoming an adult wasn't about age, it was about proving, in front of your entire community, that you could face the raw, untamed world and come back alive. For all the harshness, danger, and discipline, prehistoric parenting was rooted in something deeply human: love. It might not have looked like modern affection, with bedtime stories and birthday cakes, but it was love all the same. It was expressed not through words, but through constant action, feeding, teaching, guarding, and preparing a child for a world that had no mercy. Parents in the Stone Age knew something that shaped every decision. They could lose a child at any time. Illness, injury, predators, and famine were ever-present threats. This fragility made every moment precious. A mother might hum softly while weaving beside her baby, the rhythm of her work doubling as a lullaby. A father might hand a child a stone to shape, not because it was needed yet, but because teaching them gave purpose to the day. Love was also communal. The tribe shared in raising every child, which meant aunts, uncles, and elders often felt as much responsibility and attachment as the parents themselves. In many ways, children belonged to everyone, and their survival was a shared victory. Loss, when it came, was devastating, but it was also part of the collective memory. Elders would tell stories of children who had passed, weaving their names into songs or legends so they were never forgotten. These stories served two purposes: to honor the child and to remind the living of the lessons their short lives had taught. Legacy was more than leaving behind physical possessions. It was passing on skills, values, and survival knowledge. Parents taught not just how to hunt or gather, but how to read the land, how to notice the first signs of danger, how to respect the balance between taking from nature and giving back. In this way, a piece of them would live on in their children long after they were gone. In prehistoric life, love wasn't always gentle, but it was fierce, protective, and enduring, because in a world of uncertainty, it was the strongest survival tool they had. The emotional bond between prehistoric parents and their children was forged in the fire of constant struggle. Every shared meal, every successful hunt, every night spent huddled close to the fire was a reminder. We survived another day. That knowledge deepened connections, even if expressions of love looked different from what we know today. Affection was often practical. A parent keeping a child warm through the night wasn't just comfort, it was life-saving. Sharing the choicest cut of meat with a growing youngster wasn't indulgence, it was investing in their strength. Even the way parents taught skills was an act of devotion. Every lesson passed down was a shield against the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of the group. Children, in turn, grew up acutely aware of the sacrifices made for them. Watching their parents risk injury in hunts or brave storms to gather food left a lasting impression. Gratitude wasn't expressed with thank you, but with action, working hard, paying attention, and one day protecting their own parents in old age. Loss could reshape an entire tribe. The death of a child often left emotional scars, but it also sharpened the will to protect those who remained. Sometimes this grief led to changes in tradition, safer hunting techniques, better shelter designs, more cautious travel routes. In this way, even tragedy could lead to greater survival for the group. Legacy, above all, was about continuity. Skills were passed from parent to child like an unbroken chain. A father's way of shaping a spear point might be taught exactly the same for generations. A mother's knowledge of which plants healed wounds and which caused death could be preserved across centuries. These weren't just techniques, they were pieces of identity. For prehistoric parents, the ultimate measure of success wasn't personal comfort or wealth. It was knowing their children could live on, carry the tribe forward, and one day teach the same lessons to the next generation. As parents aged, their role shifted from protectors to advisors. Old injuries, failing eyesight, or weakened strength might keep them from the hunt, but their value didn't diminish, it transformed. Around the fire at night, they became the living library of the tribe. recounting cautionary tales of hunts gone wrong. Or the year the river froze too soon and nearly starved them all. For children who had now become adults, these lessons carried a weight they couldn't ignore. They had seen firsthand that every choice where to settle, when to move camp, which animals to hunt could mean the difference between life and death. And so, the words of their elders weren't just respected, they were treated as sacred. Sometimes, the legacy extended far beyond family bloodlines. An elder who had no surviving children might adopt a younger member of the tribe, passing down their wisdom and skills to ensure nothing was lost. In this way, the survival of knowledge was valued as much as the survival of people. When death finally came for a parent, the loss was felt deeply not only by their children but by the whole group. Mourning rituals varied. Some tribes may have covered the body with red ochre as a symbol of life's return to the earth. Others buried tools or weapons with the deceased so they could continue their role in the next world. Whatever the custom, the intent was the same: honor their life and preserve their memory. Even long after, children would retell stories about their parents to the younger generation, keeping their voice alive around the fire. It was this oral remembrance, passed from one generation to the next, that allowed prehistoric families to exist in memory long after bones had turned to dust. In the end, love, loss, and legacy were inseparable for prehistoric parents. They gave their all so that their children could walk into the future. And in a world where the future was never guaranteed, that might have been the most powerful act of love imaginable. We often imagine the prehistoric world as cold, brutal, and unfeeling, a place where survival came before everything else. And while that's partly true, the story of prehistoric parenting shows something deeper. Even in a world of constant danger, love, care, and sacrifice weren't modern inventions. They were woven into the human spirit from the very beginning. These parents didn't just pass on their DNA, they passed on skills, stories, values, and hope. They shaped not only the lives of their children, but the direction of humanity itself. Every decision, every scrap of food saved, every lesson taught was a thread in the fabric of our survival. Without them, none of us would be here today. When we look back, it's easy to focus on the hardship, the hunger, the predators, the harsh winters. But maybe the most shocking truth is this: prehistoric parents weren't so different from parents now. They worried, they dreamed. They gave up comforts they didn't even have, all to give their children a fighting chance. So the next time you imagine our distant ancestors, don't just see stone tools and cave walls. Picture a mother cradling her newborn against her chest for warmth. Picture a father teaching his child to read the stars, so they'll always find their way home. That's the real legacy of prehistoric parenting. If this journey into the past made you see our ancestors in a new light, let's keep exploring together. Hit that subscribe button, share your thoughts in the comments. What part of prehistoric parenting surprised you most? And if you want more stories that reveal the human side of history, you know where to find us. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about the people who lived it. And sometimes, those people aren't as far away as we think.